Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below like scattered diamonds. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a business empire worth billions, properties across 3 continents, and influence that reached the highest levels of government. Yet tonight something troubled his usually calm demeanor. The sound of soft footsteps on marble floors drew his attention. Rosa Martinez appeared in the doorway, her slight frame silhouetted against the hallway light. She had worked for Marcus for 3 years, keeping his pristine home spotless and his meals prepared exactly as he preferred. Rosa was reliable, quiet and invisible in the way wealthy people preferred their domestic staff to be. "Mr. Wellington, dinner is ready," she said in her gentle voice, barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, something Marcus noticed but chose to ignore. Rosa had come to America 5 years ago from a small village in Honduras, following the promise of work that could support her sick mother and younger siblings back home. She sent most of her earnings to her family, living modestly in a small apartment in Queens. Working for Marcus Wellington was the best job she had ever secured, paying more than she had ever dreamed possible. The billionaire turned from the window, his sharp gray eyes studying Rosa briefly before nodding. "Thank you, Rosa. I'll be there shortly." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. As Rosa retreated to the kitchen, she pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the subtle changes her body had been experiencing over the past few weeks. The nausea in the mornings, the exhaustion that seemed to follow her everywhere, and the missed period that had initially caused her to panic. She had taken 3 pregnancy tests, each one confirming what she already knew but desperately wanted to deny. The father was James, a construction worker she had met at a community center 6 months earlier. Their relationship had been brief but intense, ending when James decided to return to Mexico to care for his aging parents. He didn't know about the pregnancy, and Rosa had no way to contact him. She was completely alone with this life-changing news. For weeks, Rosa had struggled with whether to tell Marcus about her condition. Her employment contract included strict clauses about maintaining professional standards and avoiding any personal complications that might interfere with her duties. She feared that revealing her pregnancy would result in immediate termination, leaving her without income to support herself or her family back home. Marcus sat at his dining table, mechanically eating the perfectly prepared salmon, while his mind wandered to the board meeting scheduled for the following week. His company was on the verge of acquiring a major competitor, a deal that would cement his position as the undisputed leader in his industry. He had worked tirelessly for this moment, sacrificing personal relationships and comfort for the pursuit of success. The businessman had little patience for what he considered weakness or unprofessionalism in others. He expected his employees to compartmentalize their personal lives completely, never allowing emotions or personal issues to interfere with their work performance. This philosophy had served him well in business, but had left him isolated and emotionally distant from everyone around him. Rosa cleared the plates with practiced efficiency, her movements careful and measured. She had rehearsed the conversation she needed to have with Marcus dozens of times, but each attempt died in her throat. The fear of losing her job overwhelmed her courage every time she considered speaking up. Days passed with Rosa growing increasingly anxious. Her morning sickness became harder to hide, and she found herself exhausting more easily during her daily tasks. She began wearing looser clothing and timing her bathroom breaks to avoid Marcus noticing her frequent nausea. The stress of keeping such a significant secret while maintaining her usual work standards began taking a visible toll. Marcus, despite his self-absorbed nature, began noticing small changes in Rosa's behavior. She seemed distracted during their brief interactions, and her usually impeccable attention to detail showed occasional lapses. A glass left unwashed here, a wrinkle in a curtain there, minor imperfections that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. One evening, as Rosa prepared to leave for the day, she lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. She stood at the counter, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, gathering courage for what she knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of her life. The decision couldn't be postponed any longer. Her pregnancy would soon become impossible to hide. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, having come to discuss the following day's schedule. He noticed Rosa's unusual stillness and the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. For a moment, something almost resembling concern flickered across his features, but it quickly disappeared behind his usual mask of professional detachment. "Rosa, is everything prepared for tomorrow morning? I have the Thompson meeting at 8, and I need everything perfect," he said, his tone businesslike but not unkind. Rosa turned to face him, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. She took a deep breath, knowing that the words she was about to speak would change everything between them. The comfortable routine they had established, the professional boundaries that had kept their relationship simple and predictable, were about to be shattered. "Mr. Wellington, there is something important I need to tell you," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "Something that will affect my work here." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his attention fully focused on her for the first time in months. He could sense the gravity in her tone and the way she stood straighter, despite her obvious nervousness. Whatever Rosa was about to reveal, he instinctively knew it would complicate his carefully ordered life. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of a revelation that would test both their characters in ways neither could imagine. Rosa's hand unconsciously moved to her stomach again, a gesture that would soon carry profound significance for both of their futures. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, unaware that in one luxurious penthouse, two lives were about to intersect in a way that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, responsibility, and the true meaning of family. The conversation that was about to unfold would set in motion events that neither Marcus nor Rosa could predict, leading them both down a path that would forever alter their understanding of what it meant to truly care for another human being. "I'm pregnant, Mr. Wellington." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating through the pristine kitchen with devastating clarity. Marcus's face immediately hardened, his gray eyes turning cold as winter steel. The concern that had briefly flickered across his features vanished, replaced by the calculating expression he wore during hostile business negotiations. He took a step back, as if Rosa's condition might somehow contaminate him through proximity. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "And you thought this was appropriate to bring into my home? Into my employment?" Rosa's heart sank at his reaction, though she had expected nothing better. She straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she had inherited from generations of women who had faced impossible circumstances with dignity and tact. "I understand this complicates things, but I needed you to know I can continue working for several more months, and I will make arrangements that don't interfere with my duties," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Marcus began pacing the length of the kitchen, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor in an agitated rhythm. His mind raced through the implications of Rosa's announcement. A pregnant domestic worker in his home would be a liability, a source of potential complications he couldn't afford. His reputation in business circles depended partly on his image of cold efficiency and control over every aspect of his life. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, stopping abruptly to face her. "My household runs on precision and reliability. I cannot have someone whose condition will interfere with their performance." "You clearly understand nothing about professional standards." The cruelty in his voice cut through Rosa like a blade. She had hoped for understanding, or at least basic human decency, but Marcus was revealing himself to be exactly the heartless man she had feared he might be. Still, she refused to be intimidated or shamed for her situation. "I have never given you reason to question my work, Mr. Wellington. My personal life has never interfered with my responsibilities to you," Rosa replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "I am asking for your consideration, not your charity." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "Consideration? You want me to consider keeping an employee who will become increasingly useless as her condition progresses? Someone who will require time off, special accommodations, and who knows what other complications?" His words revealed the depth of his prejudice and lack of understanding about pregnancy or working mothers. In Marcus's world, people were either useful assets or disposable liabilities. The idea that Rosa might deserve compassion or support never entered his calculations. "Who is the father?" Marcus demanded suddenly, his tone accusatory. "Some other employee I'll have to deal with? Another complication you've created for my household?" Rosa's cheeks flushed with anger at the implication in his question. The father is not someone you know or employ. He is a good man who had to return to Mexico for family reasons. He doesn't know about the pregnancy. Convenient, Marcus sneered. So you're alone, pregnant, and expecting me to accommodate your poor choices. This is exactly the kind of unprofessional behavior I will not tolerate in my home. The billionaire's reaction was more heartless than Rosa had imagined possible. She had worked for difficult employers before, but none had shown such complete disregard for her humanity. Marcus was treating her pregnancy as if it were a deliberate act of betrayal against him personally. I'm not asking you to accommodate anything beyond what is legally required, Rosa said, her voice gaining strength. I am informing you of my condition as a courtesy and to maintain honesty in our professional relationship. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, as if her words were irrelevant noise. Professional relationship? You've already destroyed any possibility of that. I cannot have unreliable staff, and pregnancy makes you inherently unreliable. The conversation was spiraling exactly where Rosa had feared it would. Marcus's wealth and power had insulated him from the realities that ordinary people faced. He had never had to consider the challenges of working while pregnant, the financial pressures that made continued employment necessary, or the basic human need for compassion during difficult times. I need this job, Mr. Wellington, Rosa said quietly, abandoning her pride in favor of honesty. My family depends on the money I send home. My mother is sick and my siblings are still in school. Losing this position would be devastating for all of them. For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's eyes that might have been recognition of her desperation, but it was quickly suppressed by his need to maintain control and his belief that showing weakness invited exploitation. That's not my problem, he replied coldly. Your family situation is your responsibility, not mine. I pay you to maintain my home, not to create problems that require my attention or consideration. Rosa felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had faced poverty, immigration, and discrimination with her dignity intact. She wouldn't let this privileged man break her spirit, no matter how desperately she needed his employment. I see, she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I understand where I stand. Marcus felt a brief stab of something that might have been guilt, but he pushed it aside. Business was business, and maintaining his standards was more important than one employee's personal problems. He had built his fortune by making difficult decisions without allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. I'll give you 2 weeks' pay as severance, he said, as if this gesture represented unprecedented generosity. That's more than generous considering the circumstances. The offer was insulting given Rosa's years of faithful service, but she knew better than to argue further. Marcus had revealed his true nature, and no amount of pleading would change his mind. She had to accept reality and find a way forward for herself and her unborn child. Thank you for your generosity, Rosa replied, her tone making it clear that she understood exactly how little his gesture meant. As she gathered her belongings, Rosa felt a mixture of fear and determination settling in her chest. She was about to become unemployed and pregnant with no support system, but she had survived worse circumstances before. Somehow she would find a way to provide for her child and her family back home. Marcus watched her leave, already composing an advertisement for her replacement in his mind. He told himself that he had made the only reasonable decision, that maintaining his standards was more important than one woman's problems. Yet something about Rosa's quiet dignity in the face of his cruelty left him feeling unsettled in ways he couldn't quite understand. 6 months passed like a blur of struggle and determination for Rosa Martinez. After leaving Marcus Wellington's employment, she had scrambled to find work that would accommodate her growing pregnancy. The jobs available to her were few and poorly paid, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes in small restaurants, and taking care of elderly people who needed minimal assistance. Rosa's small apartment in Queens had become even more cramped as she converted the tiny living room into a makeshift nursery. She had found second-hand baby furniture at garage sales and thrift stores, washing and preparing each item with the careful attention she once devoted to Marcus's pristine penthouse. Her savings dwindled rapidly, and the money she could send to her family back home became smaller each month. The pregnancy had been difficult from the beginning. Working multiple jobs while carrying a child took a toll on Rosa's body that she tried desperately to hide. She attended free prenatal clinics when possible, But her irregular schedule and lack of reliable transportation made consistent medical care nearly impossible. Still, she persevered with the quiet strength that had carried her through every challenge in her life. Meanwhile, Marcus had replaced Rosa with 3 different domestic workers in the span of 6 months. None of them met his exacting standards. The first woman had been too slow, the second too talkative, and the third had made the mistake of rearranging his study without permission. Each dismissal reinforced his belief that good help was impossible to find. Though he never connected these failures to his own impossible expectations, his business continued to thrive. With the acquisition he had been planning finally completed successfully, Marcus's wealth grew exponentially, bringing him recognition in financial magazines and invitations to exclusive social events. Yet he found himself feeling strangely empty despite his professional achievements. Something was missing from his carefully ordered life, though he couldn't identify what it might be. On a cold February evening, Rosa went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. She had been cleaning a small office building in Midtown Manhattan when the contractions started, intense and regular. With no one to call and no money for a taxi, she managed to get to the nearest hospital by subway. Clutching the support rails as waves of pain crashed over her. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 18 hours. Rosa had no family or friends to stay with her, facing the most challenging experience of her life completely alone. The nurses were kind but overworked, able to offer only limited comfort and support. Through the endless hours of pain, Rosa thought about her child's future and promised herself that she would give this baby every opportunity she could manage. When her son was finally born, Rosa felt a love more powerful than anything she had ever experienced. The baby was small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and the most striking eyes she had ever seen. They were an unusual shade of gray-green, almost silver in certain light, unlike anything in her family's genetics. The nurses commented on how beautiful and distinctive the baby's eyes were, seeming to hold wisdom far beyond his few hours of life. Rosa named her son Diego, after her grandfather, who had been the strongest and most caring man she had ever known. As she held Diego for the first time, she made a silent vow that she would protect him from the cruelty and indifference she had experienced from people like Marcus Wellington. Her son would know love and security, even if she had to sacrifice everything to provide it. The hospital stay was brief, just 2 days, because Rosa couldn't afford anything longer. She returned to her small apartment with Diego, diving immediately into the challenges of new motherhood while trying to maintain her income. The baby was good-natured but required constant care, making it nearly impossible for Rosa to work the hours she needed to survive. Rosa's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, became an unexpected blessing during this difficult time. The widow had raised 4 children of her own and recognized the struggles Rosa was facing. Despite their language barriers, Mrs. Chen began helping with Diego when Rosa had to work, refusing to accept payment and insisting that helping each other was simply what neighbors should do. As the weeks passed, Diego grew stronger and more alert. His unusual eyes seemed to take in everything around him with remarkable intensity. Rosa would spend hours talking to her son in both Spanish and English, determined that he would be bilingual and have every educational advantage she could provide. She read to him from library books and sang the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. The financial pressure remained crushing. Rosa's work schedule was erratic, dependent on employers who had little patience for her needs as a single mother. She found herself choosing between buying formula and sending money to her family in Honduras. Some nights she went to bed hungry so that Diego would have everything he needed. One afternoon, while Rosa was walking with Diego in a stroller, she had found discarded on the street and repaired herself. She passed by Marcus Wellington's building. She paused for a moment, looking up at the towering structure where she had once worked. The doorman she remembered was still there, dressed in his pristine uniform, greeting residents with the deference wealth commanded. Rosa wondered briefly what Marcus would think if he saw her now, struggling with a baby carriage and wearing clothes that had seen better days. Would he feel any regret for his harsh treatment of her? Or would he simply feel vindicated in his decision to dismiss her? She suspected the latter, knowing that men like Marcus rarely questioned their choices or considered the consequences for others. Diego began fussing in his stroller, drawing Rosa's attention back to what truly mattered. She had no time or energy to waste thinking about Marcus Wellington and his cold indifference. Her focus had to remain on building a life for herself and her son, creating opportunities where none seemed to exist. That evening, as Rosa fed Diego his bottle in their tiny apartment, she studied his face in the soft lamplight. His eyes seemed to hold such intelligence and awareness, as if he understood more about the world than any infant should. She traced his tiny features with her finger, marveling at how perfect he was despite the difficult circumstances of his birth. Rosa began making plans for Diego's future, determined that he would have opportunities she had never enjoyed. She would save money for his education, even if it meant eating rice and beans for months. She would teach him to be strong but compassionate, successful but never cruel. Most importantly, she would show him that a person's worth came from their character and actions, not from their bank account or social status. The road ahead looked challenging, with no clear path to security or comfort. But Rosa had survived worse circumstances and emerged stronger each time. With Diego sleeping peacefully in her arms, she felt a determination that surprised her with its intensity. This tiny person had given her life new meaning and purpose, transforming her from a woman struggling to survive into a mother, prepared to fight for her child's future. 2 years had passed since Diego's birth, and the toddler had grown into a remarkable child whose presence seemed to brighten every room he entered. His unusual gray-green eyes had only become more striking with age, often causing strangers to stop and comment on their unique beauty. Diego was developing quickly, speaking in both Spanish and English with a vocabulary that impressed everyone who met him. Rosa had managed to find more stable work as a house cleaner for several middle-class families who appreciated her reliability and attention to detail. The pay was still modest, but it was consistent enough for her to establish a routine that included quality time with Diego. She had enrolled him in a subsidized daycare program, where he was thriving socially and intellectually. The small apartment in Queens had been transformed into a warm home filled with Diego's artwork, secondhand books, and the sound of laughter. Rosa had painted the walls with bright colors and hung curtains she had sewn herself, creating an environment that felt safe and nurturing despite their limited resources. Diego's corner of the living room was filled with educational toys and books that Rosa had carefully selected from garage sales and library discards. Marcus Wellington's life, in contrast, had become increasingly hollow despite his continued financial success. His business empire had grown larger, earning him recognition as one of the most influential entrepreneurs of his generation. Yet his personal relationships remained distant and transactional. The parade of domestic workers continued, with none lasting more than a few months before some minor infraction led to their dismissal. His penthouse remained as pristine as ever, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Marcus found himself working longer hours not because he needed to, but because the silence of his empty apartment had become unbearable. He filled his schedule with meetings, charity galas, and business trips, anything to avoid confronting the emptiness that seemed to be growing inside him. One afternoon in late spring, Marcus was walking through Central Park after a particularly stressful board meeting. He rarely took time for such leisurely activities, but his assistant had canceled his next appointment, leaving him with an unusual hour of free time. The park was filled with families enjoying the warm weather, children playing on swings and running through the grass with the unbridled joy that only the very young possessed. As Marcus walked along the path, he noticed a small boy playing near the pond, throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks with careful precision. The child appeared to be around 2 years old, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and an animated expression as he watched the ducks respond to his offerings. What struck Marcus most powerfully were the boy's eyes, an unusual shade of gray-green that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. The child was accompanied by a woman Marcus recognized with a shock that stopped him in his tracks. Rosa Martinez sat on a bench nearby, watching her son with the expression of pure love and contentment that transformed her face completely. She looked healthier than when she had worked for him, her dark hair longer and her clothes simple but clean. There was a peace about her that Marcus had never noticed during their professional relationship. Marcus stood frozen, studying the scene before him. The child, Rosa's son, bore no resemblance to any man Marcus could imagine Rosa being involved with. But those eyes, That particular shade of gray-green triggered a memory that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. They were remarkably similar to his own eyes, the distinctive color that had been passed down through generations of Wellington men. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, this beautiful boy playing happily in the sunshine, could be his son. The timing aligned perfectly with Rosa's pregnancy announcement, and those distinctive eyes suggested a genetic connection that seemed impossible to ignore. Marcus felt his carefully controlled world tilting dangerously as he considered the implications. Diego looked up from feeding the ducks and noticed the tall man watching them. With the fearless curiosity of a toddler, he began walking toward Marcus, his small legs carrying him confidently across the grass. Rosa noticed her son's movement and looked up, her face immediately draining of color when she saw Marcus standing there. "Hello," Diego said clearly, looking up at Marcus with those striking eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. "Are you watching the ducks too? They're very hungry today." Marcus found himself speechless, looking down at this child who might be his son. Diego's face was open and friendly, showing no fear of the stranger towering above him. The boy's mixed heritage was visible in his features, but those eyes were unmistakably similar to Marcus's own childhood photographs. Rosa quickly stood and hurried over, her protective instincts overriding her own discomfort at seeing her former employer. "Diego, come back to Mama," she called, extending her hand to her son. Her voice carried a tension that Diego was too young to understand, but that Marcus recognized immediately. "Rosa," Marcus said quietly, his usual commanding tone replaced by something much more uncertain. "Your son, he's beautiful." The words seemed inadequate to express the chaos of emotions swirling through Marcus's mind. He studied Diego's face, searching for other similarities, other signs that might confirm or deny his growing suspicion. The boy had Rosa's warm smile and animated expressions, but those eyes and something about the shape of his chin suggested genetics that hadn't come from Rosa's family. "Thank you," Rosa replied carefully, lifting Diego into her arms with a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Marcus. "We should be going. It's almost time for his lunch." But Diego wasn't ready to leave his new acquaintance. He twisted in his mother's arms to continue looking at Marcus, his young mind fascinated by this tall, serious man who seemed so different from the people he usually encountered. "What's your name?" Diego asked with the direct simplicity that only children possessed. "I'm Diego Martinez, and this is my mama Rosa." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest as the boy introduced himself with such confidence and joy. If this child was indeed his son, Marcus had missed 2 years of his life, 2 years of watching him grow, learn to walk and talk, develop the personality that was already shining through his innocent questions. "My name is Marcus," he replied, his voice softer than it had been in years. "It's very nice to meet you, Diego." Rosa's grip on her son tightened as she watched the interaction between Marcus and Diego. She could see something changing in Marcus's expression, a recognition that she had hoped would never come. The resemblance between them was subtle but undeniable to anyone who looked closely, and Marcus was clearly beginning to see what she had noticed from the moment Diego was born. "We really must go," Rosa said more firmly, backing away from Marcus while keeping Diego secure in her arms. "Say goodbye, Diego." The little boy waved enthusiastically at Marcus, his face bright with the joy of having met someone new. "Goodbye, Marcus. Maybe we'll see the ducks again tomorrow." As Rosa carried Diego away, Marcus remained standing by the pond, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just witnessed. The child's eyes haunted him, so similar to his own that the connection seemed undeniable. Yet the thought that he might be a father, that he had dismissed Rosa so cruelly while she was carrying his child, filled him with a shame, deeper than anything he had ever experienced. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington began to question the principles that had guided his existence. His pursuit of wealth and control suddenly seemed hollow compared to the genuine happiness he had witnessed in Rosa and her son. That little boy, who might be his own flesh and blood, was being raised in circumstances that Marcus could easily improve. Yet he had chosen cruelty over compassion when it mattered most. As he walked slowly back to his empty penthouse, Marcus found himself seeing his life through new eyes remarkably similar to those of a 2-year-old boy who had just asked him about watching ducks. The encounter in Central Park haunted Marcus Wellington for weeks. He found himself distracted during important meetings, staring out his office windows toward the park where he had met the boy who might be his son. Those distinctive gray-green eyes appeared in his thoughts at the most unexpected moments, accompanied by Diego's cheerful voice asking about the hungry ducks. Marcus hired a private investigator, ostensibly to gather information about Rosa's circumstances, but really to confirm what his heart already knew. The report arrived within days, containing details that made Marcus's hands shake as he read them. Rosa had given birth to Diego exactly 9 months after their last encounter, when she had revealed her pregnancy to him. The child had no father listed on his birth certificate, and Rosa had never applied for child support from anyone. The investigator had also included photographs of Diego taken from a distance, showing the boy playing in various locations around Queens. In every image, those remarkable eyes seemed to look directly at Marcus through the camera lens, creating a connection that transcended the paper and ink. The resemblance to Marcus's own childhood photographs was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Armed with this information, Marcus struggled with emotions he had spent decades suppressing. Guilt crashed over him in waves as he realized the magnitude of his cruelty toward Rosa. He had dismissed a pregnant woman carrying his child, condemning both her and his unborn son to poverty and struggle, while he lived in luxury mere miles away. The man who prided himself on making calculated decisions had made the worst mistake of his life, without even realizing it. Marcus began driving through Queens, telling himself he was simply exploring different neighborhoods, but always finding himself on Rosa's street. He would park across from her building, watching as she came and went with Diego, observing the life they had built without him. He saw Rosa loading laundry into a beat-up car, Diego helping by carrying a small bag with the serious concentration of a child given an important task. The contrast between their lives and his own became painfully clear. While Marcus lived in isolated luxury, Rosa and Diego shared a warmth and connection that all his money couldn't buy. He watched Diego playing with other children in the small playground near their apartment, his laughter carrying across the distance to where Marcus sat in his expensive car, feeling more alone than ever. One evening, Marcus witnessed Rosa and Diego returning from grocery shopping, the little boy chattering excitedly about something he had seen in the store. Rosa listened to every word with the patience and attention that good mothers gave their children, responding to his questions with genuine interest. The love between them was so evident that Marcus felt a physical ache in his chest, recognizing what he had missed and might never be able to reclaim. The billionaire's obsession with his possible son began affecting his work performance. His assistant noticed that he was making uncharacteristic errors, forgetting appointments and showing up late to important meetings. The man who had once been known for his laser focus and unwavering attention to detail was becoming scattered and unreliable. Though no one dared to confront him directly about the changes, Marcus's friends and business associates, the few people who might be considered close to him, began commenting on his distraction and mood swings. He would become lost in thought during conversations, his mind clearly elsewhere even when discussing million-dollar deals. The cold efficiency that had made him successful was being replaced by something that looked suspiciously like human emotion. One afternoon, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He drove to Diego's daycare center and waited outside, watching as Rosa arrived to pick up her son. Diego ran to his mother with the enthusiasm that children reserved for the people they loved most, throwing his small arms around her legs and launching into an animated description of his day. Marcus got out of his car and approached them, his heart pounding with nervousness that felt foreign and uncomfortable. Rosa saw him coming and instinctively pulled Diego closer, her face showing a mixture of fear and determination that made Marcus realize how intimidating he must seem to her. "Rosa," Marcus said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Could we talk, please?" Diego looked up at the tall man, his face brightening with recognition. "Marcus, you came to see us." "Mama, this is the nice man from the Ducks." The innocence in the child's voice cut through Marcus like a blade. This little boy, who should have been afraid of the stranger approaching his mother, greeted Marcus with pure joy. The trust and openness in Diego's expression made Marcus realize how much damage his abandonment had caused, not just to Rosa but potentially to his own son. "Hello, Diego," Marcus replied, his voice softer than Rosa had ever heard it. "Yes, I remember meeting you at the park." Rosa's grip on her son tightened as she studied Marcus's face. Something had changed in his expression since their encounter at the park. The cold arrogance she remembered was replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability, though she didn't trust her interpretation of his motives. "What do you want, Mr. Wellington?" Rosa asked, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "If this is about some legal matter, I assure you that I have done nothing wrong." Marcus flinched at her formal tone and the fear underlying her words. He realized that his reputation for ruthlessness preceded him, making Rosa assume the worst about his intentions. The woman who had once worked tirelessly to meet his impossible standards now saw him as a threat to be guarded against. "I want to know the truth," Marcus said simply, his eyes moving between Rosa and Diego. "About Diego. About whether he's my son." The words hung in the air between them, finally giving voice to the suspicion that had been growing in Marcus's mind since their meeting in the park. Rosa's face went pale, but she didn't deny his implication. Diego looked back and forth between the adults. Sensing tension he was too young to understand. "I think we both know the answer to that question," Rosa replied quietly, her protective instincts warring with her desire to finally have this conversation. "The question is what you intend to do with that knowledge." Marcus looked down at Diego, who was watching their exchange with the intense curiosity that seemed to be part of his nature. Those remarkable eyes, so similar to his own, seemed to be asking questions that a 2-year-old couldn't possibly formulate. In that moment, Marcus felt the full weight of 2 years of missed opportunities and abandoned responsibilities. "I want to make things right," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be part of his life if you'll let me. I want to be the father he deserves." The words sounded strange coming from Marcus Wellington, the man who had built his empire on cold calculation and emotional detachment. But looking at Diego, seeing the intelligence and warmth shining in those familiar eyes, Marcus felt something awakening in him that he had never experienced before. The fierce, protective love of a parent for their child. Rosa studied Marcus's face, searching for signs of the manipulation and cruelty she had experienced from him before. But what she saw instead was something she had never witnessed in all her time working for him. Genuine remorse and what appeared to be love for a child he barely knew. "You threw me out when I needed help most," Rosa said, her voice carrying the pain of that memory. "You called my pregnancy unprofessional and refused to show even basic human decency. Now you want to be a father?" Marcus felt each word like a physical blow, recognizing the truth in her accusations. He had been cruel beyond measure, driven by selfishness and prejudice that he was only now beginning to understand. The man who had once dismissed Rosa's pregnancy as an inconvenience was now desperate to be part of the life he had rejected. "You're right," Marcus admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "I was wrong. Completely inexcusably wrong. I let my fears and prejudices blind me to what was important. I can't change what I did, but I want to try to make amends." Diego tugged on his mother's sleeve, confused by the serious tone of the adult conversation. "Mama, why are you sad? Is Marcus making you sad?" The question broke through Rosa's emotional barriers, reminding her that whatever her feelings toward Marcus, Diego's well-being had to come first. She knelt down to her son's level, smoothing his dark hair with gentle fingers. "No, mijo, Marcus isn't making me sad. We're just having a grown-up conversation," she said softly. "Why don't you show Marcus your drawing from school today?" Diego brightened immediately, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his small backpack. The drawing showed a family of ducks by a pond, rendered in the enthusiastic scribbles that only a toddler could create. He held it up proudly for Marcus to see. "I drew the ducks we saw. See, this one is the mama duck, and these are all her babies following her around the water," Diego explained with the serious air of an art critic. Marcus accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, studying the colorful scribbles as if they were a masterpiece. This was his son's artwork, created by small hands that carried his genetic legacy. The simple drawing represented a world of innocence and creativity that Marcus had never experienced, having grown up in a household where achievement and success were valued above imagination and joy. "It's beautiful, Diego," Marcus said sincerely, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a very talented artist." The praise made Diego beam with pride, his face glowing with the happiness that children felt when their efforts were appreciated. In that moment, Marcus began to understand what he had been missing in his pursuit of wealth and power. The simple, pure joy of connecting with another human being who loved unconditionally. Rosa watched the interaction between Marcus and Diego with conflicted emotions. She could see genuine affection developing in Marcus's expression, but she also remembered the cold businessman who had dismissed her so cruelly. Could people really change that dramatically? Or was this simply another manipulation designed to get what he wanted? If you're serious about being part of Diego's life, Rosa said carefully, it can't be on your terms alone. This isn't a business deal where you get to control all the conditions. Diego needs stability and consistency, not someone who will disappear when things become inconvenient. Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding that Rosa had every right to doubt his commitment. His track record with personal relationships was poor at best, characterized by the same cold efficiency he brought to business dealings. But looking at Diego, he felt a determination unlike anything he had experienced in his professional life. I understand, Marcus replied. I know I have to earn your trust and prove that I'm serious about this. I'm not asking for immediate acceptance or forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be the father Diego deserves. The conversation was interrupted by Diego's discovery of a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. He ran toward it with the excitement that children showed for all of nature's small wonders, his attention completely absorbed by the colorful insect. Marcus and Rosa watched him together, sharing a moment of parental pride that transcended their complicated history. He's remarkable, Marcus said softly, his eyes following Diego's enthusiastic exploration of the butterfly's movements. He has your warmth and curiosity, but those eyes are exactly like yours, Rosa finished quietly. I've known since the day he was born. There was never any doubt about who his father was. The admission hung between them, carrying the weight of 2 years of secrets and missed opportunities. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had lost through his own cruelty and prejudice. Those early months and milestones that parents treasured were gone forever, sacrificed to his need for control and perfection. I want to provide for him, Marcus said suddenly. Both of you. You shouldn't be struggling financially when I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. Rosa's expression hardened slightly at the mention of money. I'm not looking for a handout, Mr. Wellington. Diego and I have managed fine on our own. If you want to be part of his life, it has to be about more than just writing checks. Her pride and independence reminded Marcus of why he had been drawn to Rosa in the first place. Though he had been too blind to recognize it at the time, she possessed a strength and dignity that his wealth couldn't buy, qualities that she was clearly passing on to their son. I understand, Marcus said quickly. I didn't mean to insult you. I want to help. I want to be involved in every aspect of his life, not just the financial parts. Diego returned from his butterfly adventure, his small hands cupped carefully around something invisible to the adults. I caught the butterfly, he announced proudly. But then I let it go because Mama says butterflies need to be free to fly. The simple statement revealed the values Rosa was instilling in their son: compassion, respect for all living things, and the understanding that love sometimes meant letting go. These were lessons that Marcus had never learned in his privileged upbringing, focused as it had been on acquisition and control rather than empathy and connection. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington's life had been transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The man who had once measured success only in dollars and power now found his greatest joy in the simple moments he spent with his son. Every weekend, Diego would visit Marcus's penthouse, bringing laughter and chaos to spaces that had known only silence and order for years. The pristine apartment had been gradually modified to accommodate a 3-year-old's needs and energy. One corner of the living room now contained a colorful play area with educational toys, art supplies, and books in both English and Spanish. The kitchen, once used only for elegant dinner parties, now featured a small step stool so Diego could help prepare simple meals, his tiny hands carefully stirring ingredients under his father's watchful guidance. Marcus had enrolled in parenting classes, much to the amazement of his business associates who couldn't imagine their ruthless colleague learning about child development and effective communication techniques. He read books about child psychology and development, approaching fatherhood with the same intensity he had once reserved for hostile takeovers, but with an entirely different motivation. The relationship between Marcus and Rosa had evolved slowly from mutual suspicion to cautious cooperation, and finally to something approaching friendship. Rosa had been surprised by Marcus's genuine commitment to changing, his willingness to follow her lead in parenting decisions, and his respect for the boundaries she established. He never tried to use his wealth to override her authority or manipulate situations to his advantage. Diego flourished under the attention of both parents, his natural intelligence and curiosity expanding rapidly with the additional resources and stimulation Marcus could provide. The little boy had no trouble accepting that he had both a mama and a papa who loved him very much. Even though they lived in different places and had very different lifestyles, Marcus's transformation extended beyond his relationship with Diego and Rosa. His business practices became more ethical and considerate, influenced by the values he was learning through fatherhood. He established scholarship programs for underprivileged children, donated to organizations supporting single mothers, and began treating his employees with a respect and dignity that shocked those who had known him before. The billionaire's social circle noticed the dramatic changes in his personality and priorities. Where he had once been cold and calculating, Marcus now showed genuine interest in others' well-being. He asked his assistants about their families, remembered birthdays, and showed patience with mistakes that he would have once punished severely. The transformation was so complete that some colleagues wondered if he had suffered some kind of medical crisis that had altered his personality. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Marcus and Diego were at the Central Park Zoo, the same place where their relationship had truly begun. Diego was fascinated by the sea lions, pressing his small face against the glass and chattering excitedly about their swimming abilities. Marcus watched his son with the wonder of someone discovering joy for the first time in his adult life. "Papa, why do the sea lions swim so fast?" Diego asked, his unusual gray-green eyes bright with curiosity. The way he looked at Marcus with complete trust and affection still took the businessman's breath away. "Well, they need to be fast to catch fish for dinner," Marcus explained, kneeling down to Diego's level. "And swimming fast is also fun for them, just like running fast is fun for you in the playground." Diego nodded seriously, processing this information with the intense concentration he brought to all new knowledge. "Maybe we could swim fast too. Mama says she will teach me when I get bigger." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Marcus agreed. "Maybe we could all go swimming together sometime." The casual mention of doing something as a family still felt miraculous to Marcus. For most of his life, he had believed that emotional connections were weaknesses that successful people couldn't afford. Now he understood that love and relationships were actually the source of true strength and meaning. As they walked through the zoo, Diego's small hand trustingly placed in Marcus's much larger one. They passed other families enjoying the weekend together. Marcus no longer felt separate from these scenes of domestic happiness. He was finally part of one himself. The wealth and status that had once defined him seemed less important than the simple pleasure of sharing Diego's excitement about the animals. Rosa joined them for lunch at a small cafe near the zoo, bringing a picnic she had prepared with Diego's favorite foods. The three of them sat together at a shaded table, Diego chattering about everything he had seen while Marcus and Rosa exchanged the kind of comfortable conversation that had developed between them over months of co-parenting. He's been asking about why some kids have parents who live together and others don't, Rosa mentioned quietly while Diego was distracted by feeding ducks at a nearby pond. "I've tried to explain that families come in different forms, but he's curious about our situation." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, watching their son carefully distribute breadcrumbs to ensure each duck received a fair share. "What would you like me to tell him?" "I want to make sure we give him consistent messages." The fact that Marcus deferred to Rosa's judgment in parenting matters was still something of a miracle to her. The arrogant man who had once dismissed her concerns so cruelly now sought her input on every decision affecting their son. The change was so complete that sometimes Rosa had to remind herself that this was the same person who had treated her so badly during her pregnancy. "I think we should tell him the truth, in age-appropriate terms," Rosa said after considering the question. "That sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but love can help people learn to do better. That his papa made a mistake before Diego was born, but now he's learned how to be a good father." Marcus felt a familiar stab of guilt at the reference to his past behavior, but he had learned to channel that guilt into determination to be better rather than wallowing in self-recrimination. "I think that's perfect, and I want him to know that even though we live separately, We're both committed to being his parents forever." Diego returned from the pond, his small face serious with concentration. "The ducks were very hungry," he reported, "but I made sure the little ones got food too, not just the big ones." The simple statement revealed the empathy and fairness that both Marcus and Rosa were working to nurture in their son. Diego was learning to consider others' needs and to share resources equitably, lessons that Marcus wished he had learned at such a young age. "That was very thoughtful of you." "Mijo," Rosa said, pulling Diego onto her lap. "Taking care of others is one of the most important things we can do." Marcus watched the interaction between Rosa and Diego, feeling grateful beyond words for the second chance he had been given. His son was growing up with values and emotional intelligence that Marcus had never possessed, shaped by a mother whose strength and compassion had survived even his worst cruelty. As the afternoon drew to a close and they prepared to return Diego to Rosa's apartment, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of sadness and anticipation that accompanied these transitions. He treasured every moment with his son, but respected the stability that Rosa's home provided as Diego's primary residence. "Papa, will you read me a story tomorrow?" Diego asked as Marcus buckled him into his car seat for the drive back to Queens. "Of course," Marcus replied, kissing his son's forehead gently. "Which story would you like to hear?" "The one about the butterfly that learns to fly," Diego said with the confidence of a child who knew his requests would be honored. "But can you do the voices again? They make me laugh." Marcus smiled, remembering his initial awkwardness at the dramatic readings Diego loved so much. The serious businessman who had once commanded boardrooms with intimidating authority now regularly performed silly voices for picture books, finding more satisfaction in making his son laugh than he had ever found in closing million-dollar deals. During the drive to Rosa's apartment, Diego chatted about his day while Marcus listened with the complete attention he had once reserved only for the most important business negotiations. Every word his son spoke seemed precious, every observation and question a window into the remarkable mind they were helping to shape. As they pulled up to Rosa's building, Marcus felt the familiar tug of not wanting their time together to end. But he also felt profound gratitude for the life they were building together, the healing that had taken place and the love that had grown from the ashes of his worst mistakes. Diego hugged his father goodbye with the unconscious affection of a child who had never known rejection or abandonment from the people who mattered most. In that embrace, Marcus felt the completion of a transformation that had begun with a pair of unusual, gray-green eyes and a child's innocent question about hungry ducks. The man who had once believed that love was a luxury he couldn't afford had discovered that it was actually the only thing that made life worth living. And in the eyes of his son, eyes so remarkably similar to his own, Marcus finally saw not just his genetic legacy, but the possibility of redemption and the promise of a future built on compassion rather than conquest.